It's time to break up with your inner critic and find your caregiver. I'm partnering with Green Mountain at Fox Run to host the first ever Be Her Now Body Kindness Weekend, just for women. Join me Thursday, June 1st through Sunday, June 4th for a weekend of love, fun, and self-care. You'll experience Green Mountain's world-renowned program and brand new body kindness spiral up activities, all in the natural beauty of Vermont. Let's take the time to work on ourselves, heal with others, and get inspired to create a better life. Learn more at fitwoman.com/bodykindness. Hey guys, just a heads up before we get into today's podcast conversation. You may find some adult content and language in our interview series for May. It is National Masturbation Month of all things. And I decided that it was time to talk about the intersections of body image and sexual health and sexuality. It's a very important topic to me. If you read Body Kindness, you know that I bring up some personal stories about body image and sort of a dry spell my husband and I went through, so to speak. So if you don't have it, maybe that is piquing your interest. And you can get that wherever books are sold, of course. But I digress. Anyway, it is, as you'll here in this particular interview, I share a little bit of what is actually going on in my life with my own two young kids, and also a little bit about what it was like for me growing up, and also including in my marriage. And I did that for you. For the benefit of all listeners, I decided to share a little bit of personal stuff. So I'm feeling a particular vulnerability about putting myself out there, but it is for educational purposes and really for us all to learn and grow. So if you are out in the open, you might want to put on a set of headphones when you listen. And I really hope that the interviews this month help motivate and inspire you to think bigger about what a better life looks like. It is definitely mind and body well-being, and sexual health is a very important part of that. I'm so excited to bring you the interviews that are coming this month, and this first one with Peggy. It is awesome, and I hope you love it as much as I do. If you like it, or any of the shows for that matter, I would really appreciate it if you let me know through iTunes. I know they don't make it easy, but if you could take a moment and offer a rating and review for Body Kindness, I would be grateful. I look at that. I want to know that I'm providing something helpful for folks, and continue to use this as a way to connect with others. And I also know that that is what lets other people know about interesting podcasts that are available. And also don't forget about becoming an insider. If you aren't already, you can visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started, and you can get a free book chapter. You can get my free e-course on body kindness. And also you'll get an invite to my private Facebook group. It's the Body Kindness Insiders group. If you request to join that group through Facebook, we are going to make sure that you're an insider as well. So we'd love to connect with you there. And thanks so much for listening. Because real health is about being good to yourself, it's time for Body Kindness, the place where all bodies fit and weight is just a number. Hi, I'm Rebecca Scritchfield, author of the book Body Kindness, registered dietitian, nutritionist, and host of this podcast. My topic today is the intersection of body image and sexual health. My special guest to discuss this is Peggy Orenstein. Peggy is the author of the New York Times bestsellers Girls and Sex, Navigating the Complicated New Landscape, and Cinderella Ate My Daughter, and a contributing writer for the New York Times Magazine. Welcome to the show, Peggy. I'm so excited to have you here. I've read both your books, watch your TED Talk. It's all amazing. I highly encourage all the listeners to dive right in. But many already know and are familiar with your work. And I'm really excited to toss some questions your way today. But just to get started, for those who might not be as familiar, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your work?
Oh, well, I'm a journalist and I've been writing about girls and women's issues for, almost 25 years now. And the two books that you're talking about, I've written five altogether, but the two in particular are sort of a duo, I think, in a certain way, although I hadn't initially seen them that way. That Girls and, I'm sorry, Cinderella Ate My Daughter looks at the way that the pink and pretty culture of little girlhood, or what I started calling the princess industrial complex, markets to girls from the very earliest ages the idea that how they look is more important than who they are, and teaches them to be that being desirable is more important than their own desire. And so it sort of seemed a natural outgrowth then to move to, so what happens down the line when that pink and pretty culture moves to the idea of selling hot and disconnects girls from their authentic internal sexual feelings. What does that mean in terms of their sex lives as they get older and perceive that?
Yeah. Well, I'm grateful for both of your books because I have two girls and they're very young. One is 2.5 and one is 4. But the first time I heard you speak was actually, it must have been several years ago at this point, but it was actually at the Renfrew conference in Philadelphia. It was an eating disorder conference. And you spoke about Cinderella Ate My Daughter. And it was the first time I heard things like about that pink used to be the boy color because it was a softer version of red. And I remember I was just, wow. And it really, I guess I just learned to accept things like, oh, here are the girl Legos that are pink. And, they're all about shopping and painting your nails. And so it was so interesting to see that before kids and then watch my kids come out. And just so you know, what kind of difference you're making, I was fully committed in my registry as like gender neutral, and I'm getting the boy Legos, darn it, like everything I could to just sort of, actually my older daughter, she does like pink. But we talk about if there's an opportunity, if she says something like blue is a boy color or green is a boy color, her grandma will say, well, green is my favorite color. And we just in gentle ways open up her mind and give her these ideas that you don't really need to kind of fall for it. So that's just a personal thank you for that. And when I saw Girls and Sex, I was like, yes, I don't need it yet, but I will. And a lot of the listeners of the podcast and readers of Body Kindness, I mean, this is a really, like a really key issue that they're still dealing with as adults, this idea of how body image issues may have gotten in the way of them really stepping into their full sexual health and their full potential. And they're still, it's around 80% of women struggle with body image issues. And it dawned on me in my counseling experience, that I was like, wow, I bet I could start to learn that some of the clients who dealt with eating disorders and body image issues just kind of felt like, well, why would I want to give my body any amount of pleasure at all? And that just got me personally interested in looking at my own past and just being willing, to kind of talk more openly in my book and in my counseling and with people about like, yes, part of our well-being is our sexual health.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I put it in terms of, in the book, I use a phrase that was coined by Sarah McLachlan, who's a psychologist at the University of Michigan, it's my favorite phrase. She calls it intimate justice. So it's in the social justice framework. And intimate justice is this idea that sex has political as well as personal implications, just like who does the dishes in your home or who vacuums the rug. And it brings up similar issues of inequality, economic disparity, violence, physical and mental well-being. And intimate justice encourages us to ask, who's entitled to engage in a sexual behavior? Who's entitled to enjoy it? Who's the primary beneficiary? And how does each partner define good enough? And yeah, frankly, I think that those are tricky and sometimes traumatic questions for adult women to confront. But when we're talking about girls and their early sexual experiences, I just kept coming back to this idea that I didn't want those experiences to be something they had to get over.
You mean getting over negative sexual experiences? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so hopefully the girls are actually reading it themselves if the parents aren't reading it to help. Both, I think, would be nice. I personally thought Girls and Sex was a fascinating read. For even if you don't have girls, right? I think we need to parent our boys too, just as much. And, even for people who don't have kids, if kids or teens look up to you, I think if you're an adult wondering, what can I do? First of all, you don't need to be at your best self to help others, but work on yourself because that's going to help you help others. But it's an area we all need to educate ourselves in and have some type of appropriate conversation. I couldn't believe it when I read in your book, you interviewed, I think it was 70 girls and only two had meaningful conversations with their fathers about sex. Is that accurate?
Yep, that's right. And, I'm actually now talking to boys and I'm finding pretty much the same thing, that if they talk about it, they're talking to their moms. But one part of the book that, I did a section on questioning the notion of the meaning of virginity. And as part of that, I went down to a purity ball, which is a ritual in which it's usually evangelicals. And it's like a kind of like a debutante ball where the fathers bring the daughters and the daughters promise to remain pure until they enter a biblical marriage. And so it's a purity ball. And you would expect somebody like me, a feminist, all these things, to go down there and just like slam the heck out of that thing. But that wouldn't be very interesting, really, as a writer or as a thinker. So when I do something like that, and there's a similar chapter in Cinderella where I go down to a beauty pageant and look at not only what is objectionable and obviously based on evidence ineffective in these things or harmful in these rituals, but what surprises me about them. And with the purity ball, I found myself, watching this sort of crazy thing, weirdly moved. And it was because it was the only place in all of my reporting where I saw fathers of teenage girls standing up, expressing support, expressing love, and having a discussion about their values around physical and emotional intimacy. And even though I didn't like the content of that discussion and that it was demonstrably ineffective to harmful, depending on the situation for the girl, it was still a place where they were doing that. And I never saw that when I was outside of that realm. So that was something I felt that those of us who have a different perspective on physical and emotional intimacy, who don't necessarily believe in waiting until marriage to be physically and emotionally intimate, could learn from that community.
Yeah, no, it was a very powerful story. Did you get any data on if girls spoke to their mothers, like that maybe that too would have increased a little bit more?
Yeah, they do talk to their mothers more, for sure.
But there's still a gap.
Well, yes, A, there's a gap, and B, one of the things, and this is sort of skipping way ahead, but one of the things that became clear was that when mothers talk to their daughters, we tend to focus on risk and danger exclusively, and that is really only having half of a conversation with them. And what I talk about towards the end of the book is the model of the Dutch. And that there was a study in particular of, like we said earlier, the book is really the voices of these girls, but there's a lot of research involved too. And one of the things I looked at was a study that compared 400 randomly chosen girls from two demographically similar universities in Holland and the US. And it found, and they were talking about their early sexual experiences, and it found that in every way, the Dutch girls came out ahead, whether it was fewer negative consequences like pregnancy, disease, being drunk during sex, more positive consequences like knowing their partner very well, being able to communicate with their partner, preparing responsibly, enjoying the experience. And when they talked to the Dutch girls, really, it made you want to buy wooden shoes. And when they went and talked to the Dutch girls, they found that they said that from an early age, their teachers, doctors, and parents talked to them early and often about sex, sexual pleasure, and the importance of mutual trust and caring in their relationships. And it wasn't so much that American parents were less willing to talk about sex. It was, again, that we talked about it in terms of risk and danger. And the Dutch parents talked about balancing responsibility with joy. And that shift for me was really profound because I'm a parent of a middle school daughter. And I know, had I not looked into that research, that I would have talked to her about contraception, disease protection, and consent because I'm a very modern mom, and I would have thought, job well done. And now I know that that's not nearly enough, and there's a different conversation that we need to be having that's maybe harder for an American parent to get to, but really rewarding once you open those doors.
Yeah, my experience, there was no conversation at all with my family. And I think that I remember one of my best friends, we're still friends to this day, however, maybe some sort of side snarkety comment about masturbation came up. It was like, ooh, that's gross, that's dirty. So that was just put in there. So it just became even more of a way of disconnecting to my body. And so that was, part of the teen years. Then all of a sudden one day I found out everyone was having sex while I was studying. I was like, wait, what's up? So then I felt behind. And so it was, I think I feel personally committed to like breaking the chain or fixing it for my girls, because I do feel that in a lot of ways that, my family didn't know what they needed to know to help, and culture certainly didn't help at all. Because if you think about it, we aren't born thinking what we think about sex in our bodies, and how you just compared the two cultures. American culture conditions us differently. And, so in body kindness, I generally call out, that diet culture is responsible for making us feel that our bodies aren't good enough. And, there's, I guess, a sexuality culture, right, that defines this is what women's bodies are for. And it's to make somebody else happy. It's not to teach us to make our bodies happy.
What we see is, we live in a hypersexualized culture that's simultaneously absolutely silent about healthy sexual relationships for young people. So it's very confusing for them. And one of the things I talk about, and this is something we can correct as parents, in this whole intimate justice, context of who gets to engage, who gets to enjoy, who's the primary beneficiary, how we define good enough. And I will say that one of the main findings was that young women today did feel entitled to engage in sexual behavior, but not necessarily entitled to enjoy it. And one of the things that I talk about is that I think relates to what you were saying a minute ago is what I called the American psychological clitoridectomy. And what I mean by that is that when we have our children, parents have a tendency to name all their baby boys' body parts. So they'll at least say, here's your pee-pee. They'll say something. But when we talk about girls' bodies, when they're infants, we tend to go right from navel to knees and leave that whole, situation in there like unnamed. And then they go into puberty education and they learn that boys have erections and ejaculations and girls have periods and unwanted pregnancy. They're not the same. And they see that, that internal thing that looks, the steer's head looking thing that looks like a Georgia O'Keeffe painting, and it grays out between the legs. So we never say vulva. We never say clitoris. Back to your point earlier, fewer than half of girls aged 14 to 17 have ever masturbated. And then they go into their partner experience, and we expect that somehow they're going to think that it's about them, that they're going to have a voice, that they're going to be able to articulate their needs, their desires, their wants, their limits, or even know what those might be and have those respected. We set them up. We set them up for inequality. It's really, not good enough for a young woman like you to think, oh, everybody's having sex, I better too. That is not liberation. That is more disconnection from our bodies. And I really think it's around these issues for women of hunger. Sexuality is also about hunger. It's about desire. It's about want. It's about understanding your body. It's about pleasure. All those things are things that we deny women, whether we're talking about food, whether we're talking about sexuality. And instead, we put all the judgment and all the it's not exactly pleasure, but all the value, I guess, in somebody else's hands.
So the question I had for you, but I also have a guess. And so the question is, like, why are women still faking orgasms? And just hearing you talk, I feel like my guess is it's like another way we must be broken. But what are your thoughts on that?
I love that you use the word broken, because there's this fantastic book, and there's a TED Talk if you don't want to read a whole book. So you should buy the book, called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski. And one of the things that she is really talking about, she's a professor, and she was teaching at Indiana University. She's teaching a course on human sexuality or something. And she found that over and over in the feedback at the end of the semester, what she got back from her female students was the main thing she'd say, what is the main thing you're taking away from this class? And they'd say that I'm not broken. They would say things like, I thought I was born without a clitoris, or like various things. And it was so, and she said it made her, she would sit in her office and cry. And she had to write this book to explain the way female sexuality works so that we would know we were not inadequate, we were not broken, we were not lesser than. It was, it was that our whole approach and learning about sexuality was wrong, not that we were. But, I think that the faking orgasm thing, what's interesting is that the rates among college students have actually gone up since the 1990s. So based on surveys. So that is something that is getting more intense. And I think there's a lot of reasons. I think some of it is porn culture. I think some of it is that girls will tell me that, well, he's trying so hard and I don't want to hurt his feelings. Some of it is just performance, that they think they're performing orgasm, just like they're performing sexiness, performing sexuality. So there's a lot of things going on. Some of it is that they want guys to think they're cool, whatever. But it's not about their bodies. And I did have one young woman who had told me, she was a junior in college at this point, and she had given me sort of we'd had a long talk about her sexual history and her sense of empowerment in the classroom and her empowerment in her professional goals and all of this, and her complete disempowerment in her body and these one-off hookups she'd been having since she was 13. And she said that just recently she realized she had to stop faking orgasm because the way that she put it was, I'm not doing other girls any favors by letting these guys think that this is, that what they're doing is working.
Yeah, because I'll be done with this guy, but then he's going to move on to the next poor soul and be a disappointing. Yeah.
It's their duty
to
change. And I thought, okay, well, if that's what it takes,
Yeah. Well, through you, I did show my girl, early on by 2-year-old baths, they were discovering that they had something going on between the knees and navel. And I said, this is the vulva, and then, basically inside where pee comes out, that's called vagina. And so they know that they're young, that they know there's 2 parts. And I just included it with, where's your head? Where's your eyes? And just in the most neutral. It embarrasses my husband, but he gets it. So he knows enough to support me. And I'm just kind of carrying.
Tell them what their elbow was. Did you ever allow your child let's just not say the word elbow ever. We better not say elbow. She might bump it on something. It's just ridiculous. And also we know that since you have children that age, they masturbate a lot when they're that age, right? They're always figuring out something's going on down there. And to say it feels good when you touch your vulva, we don't do it at grandma's Thanksgiving table. Private, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to say that both acknowledges the good feeling and also the sense that this is something personal and private without stigmatizing or shaming.
Yeah.
Both pieces I think is important, not just saying we do that in private because that, and it is like, why? So it's hard to say, but to acknowledge the good feelings, or just like when I sat in on a puberty education class where the teacher who was teaching it, they were naming the parts of the genitalia. And she said, this is the clitoris. It's for making good feelings. That's all you need to do for a 10-year-old. You don't need to go into the whole situation, but it's for making good feelings. That's what it's for.
Wow.
Boom. Right? And I thought, very good. And then later in that class, this is actually at the end of the book, I was sitting behind these 2 boys. So they're 2 10-year-old boys. And they had to, the kids they had a diagram and they had to fill in the blanks for the parts of the genital, like the scrotum, the penis, the whatever they were doing, inside and outside. And so with the female, it was the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the vulva, maybe the labia. I don't remember what it was, but the clitoris was on there. And one of the boys, said to the other one, hey, what's this again? And the other one said, that's the clitoris. It's for making good feelings. And I thought, I want my daughter dating that boy.
Me too. Well, at the risk of, TMI, truly for the benefit of the listeners. So there were 2 experiences with my girls so far. So actually the younger one, she was, my husband kind of found her. She loved just being in her diaper, prefers to be naked. And this was around 2. And he just said, oh my gosh. And he's more of a panicker. And then I just said, what? And he said, come over here. I'm going to walk away. And she had her diaper off and she had a carabiner, like one of those like clips. Sometimes your keychains. It was almost like our keychain. And she was just playing around down there. And I just said, just like you said, I said, oh, does that feel good? And, and I said, that's okay. And I said, and I did take that away from her. And I said, it's okay to use, use your hands or whatever and put her diaper on. She was really young. It was the only time, but I do feel like again, like, the older daughter was around, and kids absorb environmental things. So that could have been a source of shame. And I tried to mitigate it. And the other one was with my older one, and it was before a bath, but she just had like that typical, very, very small amount of like white stuff down there, when you're building up the healthy bacteria and everything and she had noticed it, and she just said, and she was playing around, and she just said, I don't like that white stuff. And I just said, I said, is there any reason why? And she didn't have a reason. I said, well, that it's normal. I said, mommy has white stuff, and just, we kind of left it at that. And, but I wanted her to know that like, this wasn't like poop you left on your butt that is, you want to wipe, and unhygienic, that it was a very normal thing. And I'm not saying that these are the easiest conversations to have, but I feel like by starting young, as they get older and it gets more complicated, I'm going to be more in the habit. And even if I don't like the need to have the conversation, I'm going to appreciate the outcome.
Right. You know what it is? It's you're building a scaffolding. You're building a scaffolding that's going to be able to build a bridge to having conversations that if you can start to have them later, but it's more awkward. And there's this way that I think that when we talk about sex, we put it over in this silo, right? Like it's somehow different than all the other conversations we have with our children. When the fact is that we have the same, we want them to express the same values, right? We want our children to be caring, compassionate, kind, respectful, reciprocal. All of these issues are the same in their sexual education as they are in their other citizenship, the way that they treat their friends and the way that they treat their classmates. So we have to make these bridges. So even things like, when they're playing in the sandbox when they're little and somebody says, I don't want to do that anymore. You respect that. Somebody says no, you respect no. If your child, here's another thing for parents, your child doesn't want to hug Aunt Nancy because she doesn't really know Aunt Nancy or whatever. You have to kind of suck up your embarrassment and say, you know what? She doesn't have to, because that's her body. I am not allowed to force her to hug somebody against her will. That is a non-consensual experience. And your child needs to understand that their body is theirs and that their body is under their control, and they're, the ones who get to consent. That's not always easy. Right now my daughter's going through a phase. So I have a 13-year-old, and I can't tell as many tales out of school about youth at this point. But she is going through a thing right now where, she's really conscious of her boundaries. And so she doesn't like it. Like I reached over and I was petting her hair the other night, and she just said, Mom, you didn't ask me if you could do that. And of course, she never asks me. She just hugs me or kisses me. She's very affectionate, but she has, and sometimes it's fine when if I don't ask, but now, it's at that adolescent transition where she's figuring out physically and psychologically who she is. And she wants me to ask. And that one was a little, I thought, really, but okay. But the thing that I had a hard time was that she walked by and I'd kind of pat her on the tush, and she just said, Mom, don't do that. And it's that moment, when you've got little ones, you're so connected to their bodies that you don't, originally you're totally, they're inside of you, and the whole growing up is a process of you no longer having access to that body in the same way. And so I've hit that point at adolescence where that's over, right? That is over. I do not have access to the body. I do not really see her naked. I don't, and it's hard as a parent to remember, oh yeah, I don't get to slap her on the tush anytime I feel like it anymore. She actually rankles. Maybe another kid wouldn't, but she does. She's like, that's my space. And I've said, look, I'm really sorry. And I've explained this to her. I've had your body as part of me for so long. It's hard for me to remember I'm not doing it to make you mad. And that's eased it. But I do it to my husband too. It's just an affectionate gesture. And I'm like, oh, stop that. Oh, stop that. But anyway, that whole issue of learning physical boundaries, learning your sense of control, learning consent is something that starts very young, and in very those kinds of lessons, like you said, that they just absorb, that aren't overt, that you're not saying this is what I'm doing, but you're demonstrating through your support of them what your values are.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because it came to mind one of the stories in your book that, with your daughter being able to set those boundaries, which I'm very big on personal boundaries too. And I think that comes with a strong sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So, when we get too worried about, I don't want to hurt the other people's feelings or whatever, even outside the realm of sex, like someone's commenting on my food and I don't want to hurt their feelings, I don't say, hey, shut up. I don't want to talk to you about my eating choices, but that definitely goes into the realm of sex. But in your book, you talked about the girl who was like just going with the flow, and that it was just like, yeah, that's not like, I want girls to be able to set a boundary and not feel like, oh, if they say no, or if they put their foot down or try to get themselves out of a situation, that there's no benefit to going with the flow,
Right. And it's both ways. I mean, it's both in terms of setting boundaries for the negative and also for the positive. So, one of the things that I talk about is Al Vernacchio's metaphor about sex being like a pizza that, you decide rather than a baseball, rather than the rounding the bases thing, the baseball, that because that sets
score.
That's
Did you score?
Right? It's an adversarial metaphor. Girls are supposed to be the opposing team that you're supposed to be scoring against, and it sets up girls' limits as a challenge that boys are supposed to overcome. So pizza, I realize there's eating issues around it, but just theoretically, it's a shared experience. You decide whether you want to go out to pizza. You negotiate toppings. If you want pepperoni and I want mushrooms, maybe we go halvesies, or maybe we have pepperoni this time, mushrooms next time. Or if you keep insisting on pepperoni and I'm a vegetarian, I won't go out to pizza with you anymore. It's a very when we go to eat with somebody, we think about the other person's well-being. We think about it's an equal experience. You wouldn't shove pizza down somebody's throat, but I added to that metaphor a sort of girls-only piece, which is about that going along to get along. Because since girls will sort of in a relationship say, yeah, whatever you want, or, they'll silence or suppress or subvert their own needs, I'll say, look, girls, if you don't negotiate your toppings on your pizza, you're going to end up with green peppers. And nobody wants green peppers on their pizza. So, I mean, you have to, it's not just asserting your boundaries so that you don't get bowled over with somebody, breaching your boundaries, but also so that you can assert your wants, needs, desires, as well as your limits.
Yeah, that's so important. So I want to talk a little bit more about intersections between body image and sexual health. And I think we touched on it in the beginning, this idea that it makes sense if we're having difficulty even being body neutral. These days it's tough for people to just accept this is my body, because they still want to change it, But even if we can get to body neutrality, it's very difficult to want to bring pleasure to something that you hate or that you're having difficulty with.
Right. And that's absolutely true. The research absolutely shows that these issues of self-objectification that are linked to negative body image, eating disorders, body monitoring, self-harm, depression, all of these are also, this is a real bait and switch, right? Self-objectification. So this idea that you're seeing yourself as this, assemblage of parts, or as to be judged by others, or that you're constantly thinking, am I hot enough? Am I sexy enough? All of these things is actually negatively linked to sexual satisfaction. So the more you're kind of, it's linked to body monitoring during sex. And it's linked to this thing that they call spectatoring, which is this idea that during sex, you're always watching yourself from the outside, kind of watching, like, is my arm here? Does my arm look good? What about, the bat wings? And when you're focused on that, it's certainly hard to focus on an embodied sense of sexuality. And one of the things that Emily Nagoski suggests, which I really love, is that she says, and I guess there's evidence to back this up, that this is helpful, that if you stand in front of your mirror she talks about this in her TED talk. So I really recommend that. You stand in front of your mirror as naked as you can stand to be, and you write down everything you like about yourself, what you see, even if it's like your eyelash. And if you can't find anything, then, think about the door in your mind that's blocking you from seeing anything and how that door might be opened. But write something down. Do that every single day for, I can't remember how long she says. And it actually increases, it does a little bit of mind shifting. So instead of always looking in the mirror and seeing, my thighs, my stomach, my nose, my ears, whatever, you're seeing, I like those eyelashes. I kind of like that Cupid's bow mouth I've got going on there, and it just allows you to get more towards a positive, kinder view of your body kindness, view towards yourself, that apparently, based on evidence, will improve your sexual well-being.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. And I could definitely see that working. It's interesting because it relates to one of the reader questions that came up, which is, when I'm most upset about my body, sex is the last thing I turn to. How can we use sex as a therapeutic tool when dealing with poor body image? And so I'm not thinking like fake it till you make it, because that to me means more disconnect. But is there a way that almost like taking, acknowledging you have a poor body image, but having sex or masturbating anyway, that might then help enhance your body image? Or what are your thoughts on that type of question?
Well, I can't really speak to a therapeutic context. I'm not a therapist. But, I do think, like I said, I think that idea that Emily brought up is a really good one. How can we a kind of mindful pleasure in our bodies? I don't think just having sex, especially if it's triggering all those negative feelings about your body, is necessarily going to be that useful. But, I always will say, like with little ones, that just making them conscious of physical pleasure, like even stroking your arm and thinking about trying to just stop and, close your eyes and feel good about that pleasure that it feels in stroking your arm, is a way to be in your body a little more. I think that anything that helps us embody a little more, yoga, mindfulness, all these things, which I think are used in a therapeutic context for people with negative body image or eating disorders, anything that will help us feel good about our body. If you can, not just masturbate, I think, but sort of, as I'm talking to you, I'm like touching my arms and touching my legs, do something more focused on feeling nice within your body, feeling pleasure within your body, feeling cared for in your body. I think that helps move the dial a little bit on both of those issues.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And all those ideas I think would be very, very helpful. Is there anything else that you think, I feel like we've covered so much. I got questions about, well, what if a family is a religious family and like believes that you don't have sex until marriage? Can you still teach about this is how your body works, or, like kind of like gray areas like that?
Well, I don't think that, at the end of the book, I talk about a classroom in which I'm following around a teacher who, she doesn't use words like good and bad choices or healthy and unhealthy choices, because she serves a community that has a broad range of values around these issues. So what she says is that she wants to help her students make as many choices as possible that end in joy and honor rather than shame and regret. And that construct works whether you are a family that believes that children should remain abstinent until marriage, or a child, male or female, a student who like goes out and hooks up with a different partner every weekend. I'll tell you, my mother, my parents told me that you do not become sexually active until after marriage when I was growing up. But at the same time, my mother, bless her heart, was constantly telling me how great her sex life with my dad was. And I would plug my ears and go, I don't want to hear it. I don't want, yuck, 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 yuck. But at the same time, I did hear what she was trying to tell me. So I didn't see those values growing up as in conflict. The idea that you could simultaneously tell a child that this was something that ethically and in terms of your personal value, I think that you can be a family that ethically and in terms of your values can communicate these beliefs while also saying that sex is something wonderful, that it should feel good, that this is how that works, that giving and taking and mutuality and reciprocity and respect and compassion and pleasure within that relationship are important. As I know that, I'm Jewish, and in the Jewish faith, that's very clear. That one of the few reasons in Orthodox Judaism that a woman can divorce a man in very traditional culture is because he's not satisfying her sexually. That is actually a legit reason. Abstinence until marriage education is ineffective. According to all of the research, not only do kids not become sexually active, they have higher rates of oral sex, higher rates of anal sex, just as many partners, but they're more likely to become pregnant or contract disease because somehow they jettison the no sex till marriage message, but they hang on to the message that, I don't know, somehow you don't use birth control or disease protection. So it has been an ineffective message, from a public health perspective, to communicate to children. So I don't know, within a particular family that may be different. I don't know. But in terms of a public health message, in terms of sex education in schools, in terms of a kind of overarching message, communicating something very different, as we saw with the Dutch, is a much better idea.
Well, it's been a very good and interesting and very helpful conversation today for me personally. And I know for the listeners who are, really just struggling with this idea of, I like how you said, it really becomes a question of who has a right to engage in sex and masturbation and feeling good and who gets to enjoy it. And it sounds like there is more engagement in younger people, but girls don't necessarily have permission to enjoy. And that is something that, even if we don't have kids, if that's going on with us as adults, like that is a problem that we can solve. I actually read Emily Nagoski's book. It finally gave me permission, and I brought my husband and we went to a legitimate sex and communication education class, and it was good. And it really kind of, to me, I felt like was necessary to have, okay, I'm married, let's go and do this together, and we went downstairs and looked at vibrators together and we picked up some oils or whatever. And it was this is something we can do together. And it's not because you're not good enough or it's not because I'm broken. It was more why not? It was why the hell not? And so it ended up becoming a story in Body Kindness, where it was just kind of we were in a dry spell, and I didn't think it was just because we had young kids, although that is a big barrier. But there was something more, and so I feel this is. Yes, I could shy away from it, or I could, bring some people on who deal with and understand sex and sexuality and can just encourage people that this may be what helps you with your own body image. It may be what helps you just realize that there's more things to life than what size pants you're wearing. And it can help you in so many other ways. So I'm really grateful that we had this conversation. I would love to just kind of back and forth, kind of sum up for parents of young kids, what are a few kind of key things they should do?
Well, again, I would say naming the body parts, not shaming children around masturbation, but saying things like, it feels really good when you touch your vulva, naming that body part, but we don't do it, we do that in our rooms or in the, whatever. There's a great book. Well, I'm going to actually give you two resources that I think are terrific for parents of young kids, meaning 0 to puberty. Okay. One is for parents. It's called From Diapers to Dating, From Diapers to Dating. And it's written by a Unitarian minister, a former Unitarian minister, because Unitarians do the best sex ed, the best. So they're like a little piece of Holland in America. Our whole life's curriculum. It goes from 5 to I think into your 60s, and it's spectacular. And she was also the president of the Sexual Information Education Council. I can't remember what SICUS is of the U.S. And it looks at talking to your child and thinking about your child in terms of sexuality from infancy through puberty. And it looks at it from a developmental perspective. So it really weaves in a lot of developmental psychology, which is really interesting because it turns out when your 3-year-old asks, where did I come from? They may not mean what you think they mean. So to understand all of that is really critical. Also, another great book for parents of I think for little ones too, but also for parents of slightly older kids is Talk to Me First by Deborah Rothman. That's really a gold standard book. For children themselves, it's really good to have around the house. You should be getting this now, Rebecca, the books of by Robie, Robie Harris, They're called they're from for children from about 4 to 12, and they're called things like It's So Amazing, It's Not the Stork, It's Perfectly Normal, and I can't remember which ones are for which ages, but it's really great to have those in the house, because when your child is sitting at the dinner table, as mine was, when they're 6 or something, and suddenly the fork stops halfway from the mouth to the mouth, and they get that sort of dreamy look, and she says something like, "So I understand about the sperm and the egg, but how does the sperm get from the penis into the vagina, Mom?" And your husband gives you that look. You can say, "Honey, that's a great question. After we eat dinner, let's go read your book and look at that." And you will have that at the ready, instead of going, humana. So you need to be on top of it. You need to be a little bit ahead, so that those questions are natural, so that those bridges, that scaffolding can be built, so those bridges are there. So those are some really concrete ideas.
Cool. I appreciate that. And then with teens, it sounded like, so you talked about the body parts, so it's reinforcement, but the big thing there is it's conversing at all, but when you converse, not just risk, but about the joy piece of it. And, that it's choosing pizza toppings, a mutual respect, or I guess with the layer of your family has your own family values, but you can still educate beyond risks and kind of let that be in your family unit, what you decide to do. Anything else crucial in the teen years?
Yeah. So for puberty, I would say there's a great website called amaze.org that's new, that handles all of those issues and handles talking about sexuality for younger kids. There's also the book Dating Smarts is very good. For high school kids, and college kids, I recommend Heather Carina wrote a book called SEX, something like an all-you-can-use progressive guide to, I don't know, something, but SEX. And she also runs the website Scarlet Teen, which it will answer any questions. And those are more progressive. I don't know that they're geared towards families so much that expect their children to remain abstinent, but they're both really great resources for kids. Talk to Me First is that book is for adults. There's some looking at things like Consent is Like a Cup of Tea, or This Is Your Brain on Porn. Those are very good. Those are both videos that are really, meet kids where they're at in the video world. Those are really great videos to combat some of these things. So, and I think, what I always say is, I wrote this book in part to open a dialogue between parents and girls and boys. And so I have, it has a tremendous readership, it's turned out, among high school girls and college girls. And it opens those doors of conversation with parents to be able to say, what's going on in your world around these issues? She's saying this is going on in this book. It's like a safe space.
Yeah.
To talk about it without having to say, "So are you enjoying your sex life, honey?" So reading that together, or watching the TED Talk together that I did, or trapping your child in the car when you happen to be listening to the Fresh Air podcast that I'm on or something, is a way to open that door to conversation if your child is a teen now and you haven't had those conversations. When I'm talking about the hookup culture in those talks, not the TED Talk, I don't think I do, but in the book and in the Fresh Air podcast, is that true in your school? What's it like? What's it been like for you? What do you think? What do you think about, what she's saying about oral sex here? It's a way to just talk about it that takes it a little bit out of themselves, so it's a little less awkward for them.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great idea. And I would add, I'm not a therapist, but I do a lot of behavioral counseling, and I work with a lot of therapists with clients and stuff. And we will often talk about just the power of opening up a conversation, and that you're right. It opens the door. You might get squeams and whatever, and don't talk to me about that, but it's opened a door, and doesn't have to turn into a battle. It's more of an invitation. You can be consistent in your willingness to engage in conversation about it. And you never know when all of a sudden, the fish is going to bite, so to speak, because the door has been opened. So you haven't failed as a parent if you both feel awkward and they went running in the other room, it's not yet. So you keep trying, and you do get to decide that this is important to me and is part of my job. And this doesn't need to become a battle, right? But as a parent, I've got to be consistent with my willingness to work on this because I may be making an impact that they don't even see.
Right. And we don't get to choose to not parent because it makes us feel embarrassed. You got to go for it. And yeah, it may have an impact that they don't see. And it also, frankly, will enhance your relationship to break through that taboo and basically present yourself to your child and say, here I am on your side. I'm willing to have a conversation about these things. You can basically talk to me about anything and I'm not going to flinch. Mm-hmm. That's important.
Well, it has been so great. I really appreciate it. I'm going to share, I definitely recommend your books and the TED Talk. I haven't heard about Fresh Air, but I'll find that and make sure that's included in the show notes. Where can people kind of follow you, stay on top of everything you're doing so they're always on top of what you have next?
I've got my Facebook author page and my little Twitter account like everybody, a website, on PeggyOrenstein.com. I'm working on a book on boys now. That's what I'm doing next.
Yay! I was wondering if you were going to say something. So is it, when will it be out? Is it similar to Girls and Sex, but just with the other gender, or what should we expect?
Yes. And don't push me on when it's going to be out. What are you, my editor? No, yeah, it'll probably be out. My guess is like 2020.
Okay, cool. Very cool. Wow. Well, it can't come soon enough. Thank you so, so much for being a guest on today's show and for all the work you do. I'm sure you get feedback and fan emails and all that, but just know that for everyone you hear, there's probably thousands of people you're helping and making a difference in their life that you never hear from. And it's very meaningful. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Become a Body Kindness Insider. Visit bodykindnessbook.com and click on Get Started.